You can tell everything about a person by what they do when they have nothing left to give. The words didn't belong to anyone in the room, not yet, but somehow they hung in the air as Emily Carter stood frozen behind the counter, gripping a chipped ceramic mug that wasn't hers to keep, her knuckles pale against the dim yellow glow of the diner lights. It was 9:42 p.m., the late shift, the kind where tips dried up and patience ran thinner than the watery coffee she kept refilling for customers who barely looked at her. Outside, rain streaked down the windows in uneven lines, blurring the neon sign into a dull red smear, and inside, the low hum of conversation mixed with the clink of silverware created a rhythm she had learned to disappear into. But tonight, disappearing wasn't an option. "Are you even listening?" the man at table 6 snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut through the room. Emily blinked, forcing a polite smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. I can bring that right out. You already said that 10 minutes ago," he interrupted, leaning back in his chair like he owned more than just the booth. A couple at the next table glanced over, then quickly looked away, the way people do when discomfort doesn't belong to them. Emily nodded, swallowing the sting in her throat, her fingers tightening around the order pad. She could feel her manager's eyes from across the room, that silent warning that said one more complaint and you're done. One more mistake, and the paycheck she was counting on, every dollar already spoken for, would vanish before she ever held it. Rent was 3 days overdue. Her phone had been cut off that morning. And in the pocket of her apron, folded so many times the edges had gone soft, was the last $10 bill she had in the world. $10. It wasn't much, not to anyone sitting in this diner ordering burgers without checking the price, but to Emily, it was everything between making it through tomorrow or not. She exhaled slowly, turning toward the kitchen, when the bell above the door chimed, soft but clear, cutting through the tension like a shift in the scene no one had asked for. A man stepped inside. Rain clinging to his jacket, his hair damp, his posture slightly hunched as if the weight of the night pressed harder on him than it did on anyone else. He hesitated just inside the doorway, scanning the room with uncertain eyes, not quite belonging to any of it. Emily noticed him immediately, not because he stood out, but because he didn't. There was something quiet about him, something worn, like he had been overlooked too many times to expect anything different now. He approached the counter slowly, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his voice low when he finally spoke. "Hey. I'm sorry to bother you." Emily turned, offering the same practiced smile, though softer this time. "It's okay. What can I get you?" He shook his head slightly, glancing down as if the words were harder to say than they should be. "Actually, I'm not here to order." A pause. Just long enough for the air to shift again. I lost my wallet earlier. I just need $10 to get a bus ticket out of here. I wouldn't ask, I've got nowhere else to go." Emily felt something tighten in her chest, her hand instinctively brushing against her apron pocket where that last bill rested, crumpled and fragile like the thin line she was walking. $10. Her last $10. The man didn't look up, as if he already expected the answer, already bracing for rejection the way people learn to do when they've heard no too many times. Around them, the diner kept moving, orders being called, chairs scraping, conversations continuing as if this moment didn't matter. But for Emily, everything slowed. The manager glanced over again. Table 6 was still waiting. And yet, all she could see was the way the man's shoulders dipped just slightly, like hope had already started to slip away before she even spoke. She should say no. She needed to say no. But her fingers were already moving, slipping into her pocket, brushing against the worn edges of that final bill, and for a brief second, her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else. "It's just $10, she whispered to herself, though it felt like so much more. Then she looked up at him, really looked this time, and something in his eyes, tired, quiet, honest, made the decision for her before logic ever had a chance to catch up. Emily did not let herself think any longer because thinking meant hesitation and hesitation meant she would pull her hand back, so instead she took the $10 bill from her pocket and held it out, her fingers trembling just slightly as the paper caught the dim light above the counter, and for a second the man did not move as if he could not quite believe what he was seeing, then slowly, almost carefully, He reached forward and took it from her like it was something fragile, something that could disappear if he moved too fast, his eyes lifting to meet hers for the first time, and there it was again, that quiet exhaustion, but now mixed with something else, something softer, something that looked a lot like relief. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but steady, and Emily forced a small smile even though her chest felt tight. "Just get home safe," she replied. The same words she had whispered to herself moments earlier now leaving her lips before she could second-guess them. The man nodded once, like he understood more than she had actually said, and then he turned and walked back out into the rain, the bell chiming again as the door closed behind him, and just like that, the moment was over, swallowed by the noise of the diner as if it had never happened at all. "Emily," her manager's voice cut sharply from across the room, pulling her back into reality. "Table 6 is still waiting." She blinked, quickly turning away, grabbing the order and moving toward the kitchen. Her heart still beating a little too fast, her pocket now empty, lighter in a way that did not feel like relief. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of refilled drinks, forced smiles, and the constant ache of knowing she had nothing left, no backup, no safety net, just a quiet hope that somehow tomorrow would figure itself out. By the time the clock above the register flicked to 10:58 p.m., the diner had thinned out. The rain outside had slowed to a soft drizzle, and Emily wiped down the last table with slow, tired movements, her feet aching from standing for hours, her stomach reminding her that she had skipped dinner again. She reached for her apron pocket out of habit and felt nothing, and for a brief moment panic flickered in her chest before she remembered. It was gone. She had given it away. She exhaled slowly, pressing her palm flat against the table to steady herself. "You are too soft," her co-worker Jenna muttered as she passed by with a tray of empty plates, not unkindly but not wrong either. Emily gave a small shrug. "Maybe," she said quietly, though she did not sound convinced. Because something about the way that man had looked at her lingered, something that made it feel like she had not just lost something tonight, but done something that mattered, even if no one else saw it, even if it changed nothing for her. She finished cleaning, clocked out, and grabbed her thin jacket from the hook near the back door, stepping outside into the cool night air where the city felt different, quieter, the streetlights casting long reflections on the wet pavement. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself and started walking toward the bus stop, already calculating how far she could go without money. Maybe she could walk halfway, maybe she could ask someone, maybe she could just keep moving until she figured something out. But before she could get far, headlights swept across the front of the diner, brighter than anything that had passed by all night, followed by the low, smooth sound of engines that did not belong to this street. Emily turned slightly, her brow furrowing as one, then two, then three black SUVs pulled up in a slow, deliberate line right outside the entrance she had just left, their glossy surfaces reflecting the streetlights like mirrors, doors opening in near-perfect unison, and suddenly the quiet street did not feel so ordinary anymore. People inside the diner paused, faces turning toward the windows, and even from where she stood, Emily could feel it, that subtle shift in the air, like something important had just arrived without warning. She hesitated, her steps slowing as curiosity pulled her gaze back toward the building, and for reasons she could not explain, her heart began to race again, not from fear but from the strange, unshakable feeling that the night was not over yet. Emily did not realize she had stopped walking until the cold air settled against her skin and the distant murmur from inside the diner pulled her back like an invisible thread, her eyes fixed on the line of black SUVs now parked with quiet authority along the curb, engines still running low, steady, expensive in a way that did not need to announce itself loudly. People inside pressed closer to the windows, silhouettes shifting with curiosity, and even from the sidewalk she could see her manager straighten his posture, smoothing his shirt like instinct had taken over before logic could catch up. Something important was happening, something far bigger than their little late-night diner ever saw. Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of her jacket as she took a slow step back toward the entrance, not fully committing but not able to walk away either. The bell above the door chimed again as someone rushed out to get a better look, and then the rear door of the first SUV opened, not hurried, not dramatic, just precise, controlled, and a man stepped out, tall, composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark coat that caught the light in a way that made everything else seem dull by comparison. Conversations inside the diner dropped to a hush that felt almost unnatural, like the room itself was holding its breath. Emily leaned slightly closer, her brow furrowing as something about the way he moved felt familiar, not obvious, not clear, just a faint echo of something she could not place yet. The man paused briefly, glancing toward the entrance as if confirming something, and then another door opened, then another, assistants, security, all stepping into position with quiet efficiency, forming a presence that shifted the entire street, and then he started walking, straight toward the diner, each step measured, confident, like he had walked into rooms like this 1,000 times before and knew exactly what would happen next. Emily's heart picked up. Without warning, a strange mix of curiosity and unease settling in her chest as she followed behind the small group re-entering the diner, slipping just inside. The doorway again, the warmth hitting her skin but doing nothing to calm the sudden rush of tension in the air. Everyone was watching now, customers half standing from their seats, waitresses frozen mid-step, her manager already moving forward with a smile that looked more practiced than genuine. "Good evening, sir," he said quickly, almost too quickly. "We were not expecting." "That is fine," the man replied, his voice calm, controlled, carrying just enough authority to end the sentence before it could continue, and then he stepped further inside, the light above finally catching his face clearly, and in that exact moment, everything inside Emily went completely still, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat, her mind struggling to catch up with what her eyes were already telling her. It was him, the same man from less than an hour ago, the same tired eyes, the same quiet expression, but now sharpened, focused, framed by confidence instead of exhaustion, the man she had just given her last $10 to stood in the center of the diner like he owned every inch of it, and suddenly nothing about him looked uncertain anymore. Whispers spread through the room in a low wave, names being said, guesses turning into certainty, and then one of the men behind him stepped forward slightly, speaking just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone formal, practiced. "Please welcome Alexander Hayes, founder and chief executive officer of Hayes Global." The words landed like a spark in a dry room, immediate, undeniable, the kind of name people recognized even if they had never seen his face before. Emily felt her fingers loosen at her sides, her body almost swaying as the reality settled in piece by piece. Billionaire, the man she had thought had nothing, the man she had believed needed help, stood there surrounded by power she could not even begin to understand. And then, slowly, deliberately, Alexander Hayes turned his head, his eyes scanning the room until they found her, and when they did not move away, not even for a second. The room did not erupt the way Emily expected it to. There was no loud gasp, no dramatic reaction, just a slow, heavy shift as recognition spread from one table to the next like a quiet wave, people straightening in their seats, whispers turning into names, and suddenly every eye in the diner was locked on the man standing at the center of it all. But he was not looking at them, he was looking at her, and the weight of that gaze made her chest tighten as if the air had changed only for her. Her mind replaying the last hour in fragments that no longer made sense. The rain, his voice, the way he had held that $10 bill like it mattered, and now here he was, Alexander Hayes, a name that did not belong in this place, a name that carried boardrooms and headlines and numbers too large to imagine, standing just a few feet away from the counter where she had handed him everything she had left. Her first instinct was to step back, to disappear into the kitchen or behind someone taller, anyone, but her feet refused to move, rooted in place by a mixture of shock and something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to embarrassment. Her manager cleared his throat nervously, stepping forward again with forced confidence. "Mr. Hayes, if we had known you were coming, we would have prepared something more appropriate." His voice carried just enough to be heard by the room, careful, respectful, almost eager, but Alexander barely acknowledged him, his attention still fixed on Emily as if the rest of the diner had faded into the background. And then, without raising his voice, he spoke. "I did not come for the food." The sentence was simple, but it landed with a weight that silenced the last remaining whispers. Emily felt her pulse in her ears, loud and uneven, as he took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them with calm certainty, each movement deliberate, controlled, nothing like the hesitant man she had met at the counter less than an hour ago. He stopped just short of her, close enough that she could see the same tiredness in his eyes, but now it was layered with something sharper, something intentional, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence stretching just long enough for the entire room to lean into it, waiting, watching, trying to understand what they were witnessing. Emily swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper when it finally came out. "I did not know," she said, the word simple, honest, and somehow heavier than anything else she could have said. Alexander's expression softened almost imperceptibly, and then he reached into the inner pocket of his coat, his hand moving with that same calm precision. When he pulled it out, The $10 bill rested between his fingers, slightly wrinkled. Unmistakable, and suddenly every person in the diner leaned in just a little closer, curiosity sharpening into focus. He held it up just enough for it to catch the light, not as a display of wealth, but as something entirely different, something that did not belong in a place like this. 1 hour ago, he said, his voice steady, carrying easily across the room without effort, I stood outside in the rain and asked for help. A few people shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flickering away as if the memory of that moment had just become real to them. Most people looked past me, he continued, not accusing, not angry, just stating a truth that settled heavily in the space between them. Some walked faster, some pretended not to hear. Emily felt her fingers curl slightly at her sides, her heart tightening as she realized what he was doing, not just revealing himself, but revealing something else entirely. But one person stopped. He said, and now his eyes moved back to her, steady. Certain, one person gave me the only thing she had left. The room fell completely silent, no clinking dishes, no low conversations, just the sound of breath held too long, and in that moment, Emily wished she could disappear more than ever, not because she regretted what she had done, but because she had never expected it to matter this much, not in front of everyone, not like this. Alexander lowered the bill slightly, his voice softening just enough to change the tone of the moment, and that, he said, is why I am here tonight. The silence that followed his words did not break right away. It stretched, heavy and deliberate, pressing down on everyone in the room as if forcing them to sit with what they had just heard, and Emily felt it the most, standing there with nothing to hide behind, no tray, no counter, no movement to distract from the fact that every eye had shifted from him to her, the waitress no one had noticed an hour ago, now at the center of something she never asked for. Her instinct told her to speak, to say something small, something to deflect the attention, but her voice stayed locked somewhere deep inside her chest, because nothing about this felt small anymore. Alexander lowered his hand slowly, the $10 bill still between his fingers, and for a brief moment he looked at it, not as money, but as if it carried a meaning far beyond its value. Then he looked back at the room, his expression calm, but his presence commanding enough that no one dared interrupt. Kindness is easy when it costs nothing, he said, his voice even, measured, but when it costs everything, that is when it becomes rare. A man near the window shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at his untouched plate. A woman near the counter crossed her arms as if trying to shrink from the moment, and Emily could feel the weight of those reactions even without looking directly at them, because she knew exactly what he was saying, and she knew it was not just about her, it was about everyone who had been there earlier, everyone who had chosen to look away. Alexander took another step, not closer to her this time, but slightly to the side, turning just enough to face the entire diner. Tonight was not planned for any of you, he continued, but it was not random either. His assistant stepped forward slightly, holding a tablet, ready but silent, waiting for the signal that had not yet come. For the past 6 months, Alexander went on, I have been visiting places like this across the city, without announcement, without identity, asking one simple question. His eyes moved slowly across the room again, meeting people one by one. Who helps when there is nothing to gain? A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd, confusion mixing with realization as pieces began to fall into place, and Emily felt her heart tighten again, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming realization that this moment, this night, had been part of something much bigger than she could have imagined. Alexander turned back to her then, fully this time, the room fading once again as his focus narrowed. Emily Carter, he said, and hearing her full name spoken like that made her breath catch, because it sounded different coming from him, heavier, more intentional. You did not ask who I was, he continued. You did not hesitate long enough to calculate what you might gain. His voice softened slightly, not losing authority, but gaining something else, something closer to respect. You saw someone who needed help, and you acted. Emily felt her eyes sting faintly, her vision blurring for just a second before she blinked it away, refusing to let herself break in front of everyone. She straightened slightly, her shoulders pulling back not out of confidence, but out of something quieter, something steadier. It was just $10, she said finally, her voice still soft, but clear enough to carry. A few people shifted again, perhaps expecting more, but that was all she offered, because to her, that had been the truth. Alexander studied her for a moment, and then something in his expression changed, not dramatically, just enough to reveal that he understood exactly what she meant, and more importantly, what she did not say. No, he replied calmly, lifting the bill slightly again. It was not just $10. His gaze held hers, unwavering. It was everything you had. The word settled between them, simple but undeniable, and for the first time since he walked into the diner, the power in the room shifted, not toward him, but toward her, and everyone felt it, even if they could not explain why. Emily felt the shift before anyone else spoke again, a subtle change in the air that made everything feel suspended, like the night itself was waiting for what would come next. Her heart beat slow but heavy in her chest, not racing anymore, but grounded, as if something inside her had settled into place without her fully understanding why. Alexander lowered the $10 bill slightly, his fingers smoothing over its creased edges with a quiet care that seemed almost out of place for someone who operated in numbers most people could not comprehend, and then, without turning away from her, he spoke again. There is a difference between generosity and sacrifice. His voice carried easily, drawing every eye back to him, but still anchored to her. Generosity comes from abundance, sacrifice comes from scarcity. A few people shifted again, the meaning landing deeper this time, harder to ignore. Tonight, he continued, I was not looking for generosity. His gaze softened just slightly. I was looking for proof that it still exists. Emily swallowed, her hands now resting loosely at her sides, no longer clenched, no longer hiding, because there was nothing left to hide. Not after this, not after being seen in a way she never had been before. Alexander took a small step back, creating just enough space between them to shift the focus outward again, and with a subtle motion of his hand, his assistant stepped forward, unlocking the tablet and holding it at an angle only he could see. Hayes Global is launching a new initiative next quarter, Alexander said, his tone returning to something more structured, more formal, but no less intentional, a program focused on community support, employment pathways, and direct outreach to individuals who are often overlooked. The words sounded like something from a press release, but the way he delivered them made it feel personal, immediate. We have spent months building the framework, he added, but we have been missing something critical. He paused, just long enough for the room to lean into the silence again. Perspective. His eyes moved back to Emily, steady, certain, the kind that cannot be taught in a boardroom. Emily felt a flicker of confusion now, cutting through the emotion, her brow tightening slightly as she tried to follow where this was going. Alexander extended the tablet slightly toward her, not forcing, not rushing, simply offering, I want you to help lead it, he said, and for a second, the words did not register, not fully. They hung in the space between them like something unreal, something meant for someone else. What? Emily's voice came out before she could stop it, barely above a breath. A few people in the diner shifted again, the tension now replaced with anticipation, curiosity sharpening into something closer to disbelief. Alexander did not smile, but there was a quiet certainty in his expression. A paid position, he clarified, training included, full support, housing assistance if needed. Each word landed heavier than the last, not because of what they offered, but because of what they represented, a way out, a way forward. Something she had not allowed herself to imagine in a long time. Emily shook her head slightly, instinctively, her body reacting before her mind could process. I do not have a degree, she said quickly, the first barrier that came to mind, the one she had carried for years. I have never done anything like that. Her voice steadied as she spoke, not defensive, just honest. Alexander nodded once, as if he had expected that answer. Exactly, he replied, you have done something far more valuable. He lifted the $10 bill again, just slightly, enough to remind her, to anchor the moment back to where it began. You acted when it mattered. The room was quiet again, but no longer heavy. Now it felt charged, like something important was unfolding in real time. Emily looked at the tablet, then back at him, her mind racing through everything at once, the rent, the empty pocket, the long nights, the constant feeling of being one step behind, and then this, an offer that felt too large, too sudden, too public. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides again, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision pressing in. Why me? She asked finally, her voice steady but searching, and this time, Alexander did not hesitate, because when you had nothing, he said quietly, you still chose to give, and in that moment, Emily realized this was not just an opportunity, it was a test of a different kind, one she had never expected to face. Emily did not answer right away, not because she did not hear him, but because the weight of the question pressed deeper than anything else he had said, her eyes drifting from his face to the tablet in his hand, then briefly to the floor, as if grounding herself in something familiar before stepping into something completely unknown. The diner around her still silent, every person waiting, watching, but for the first time since this began, she was not thinking about them, she was thinking about herself, about the quiet reality she had been living for so long that it had started to feel permanent, the late shifts, the careful budgeting, the constant calculations of what she could afford to lose and what she could not, and tonight she had already crossed that line once. She had given away the last $10 she had, not because she expected anything in return, but because in that moment it felt right, simple, human, and now that same moment had turned into something else entirely, something bigger, something that came with consequences she could not yet see. She let out a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling as she finally looked back up at him. Really looking this time, not at the billionaire standing in front of her, but at the man she had met in the rain, the one who had asked for help without certainty, the one who had taken the $10 like it mattered. "If I say yes," she began, her voice steady but careful, "then what happens tomorrow?" The question was not about the job, not really, it was about everything that came with it, the unknown, the shift, the possibility of stepping into a life she had never planned for. Alexander did not answer immediately, and that hesitation was different from before, not calculated, not strategic, but honest, as if he understood exactly what she was asking beneath the words. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "you start learning something new." His tone was calm, but there was no pressure in it, no expectation forcing her hand, "and you keep deciding if it is something you want." Emily's brow tightened slightly, processing that, because it was not the answer she expected. There was no promise of instant change, no guarantee that everything would be fixed overnight, just an opportunity, one that required her to step forward on her own terms. She glanced around the diner then, noticing for the first time the way people were watching her differently, not with judgment, not with dismissal, but with something closer to respect. Even the man at table 6, who had snapped at her earlier, now sat quietly, his gaze lowered, as if the moment had reshaped more than just her night. She swallowed, her mind racing again, but this time not with fear, with something else, something that felt like a choice, a real one, the kind she had not had in a long time. "And if I say no?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost testing the boundaries of what this moment allowed. Alexander's expression did not change, not disappointed, not surprised, just steady. "Then nothing changes," he replied. "You walk out of here the same way you planned to." He paused, then added, "And that does not make what you did tonight any less important." The simplicity of that answer settled something inside her, because it meant this was not a transaction, not a reward she was being pressured to accept, but a door, one that would remain open only if she chose to walk through it. Emily felt her fingers relax again, the tension slowly leaving her body as clarity replaced the noise in her thoughts. She looked at the tablet once more, then back at him, and for a brief second, the memory of that moment outside flashed through her mind, the rain, the hesitation, the decision. She had not overthought it then, she had just acted, and somehow that had led her here. She took a small step forward, closing the distance he had created earlier, not dramatically, just enough to signal that she was no longer standing still. "I do not want something just because it is offered," she said quietly, her voice firm now, grounded in something deeper than uncertainty. "I want to understand it." Alexander nodded once, a subtle acknowledgement that she was approaching this exactly the way she should. "Then start by accepting it," he said, his tone steady, "and question everything after." Emily held his gaze for a moment longer, searching for anything that felt uncertain, anything that suggested this was too good to be real, but all she found was the same quiet certainty that had been there from the beginning, and for the second time that night, without fully knowing where it would lead, she made a decision not based on fear, not based on need, but based on something simpler, something true. "Okay," she said, the word soft but clear, and in that moment, everything shifted again, not around her, but within her. For a moment, nothing moved, not the people, not the air, not even the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the counter, as if the entire diner needed a second to catch up to what had just happened. And then the shift came, subtle but undeniable, the kind that does not make noise but changes everything. Alexander nodded once, not as a celebration, not as approval, but as acknowledgement, like he had expected nothing less from her. And then he turned slightly, gesturing toward his assistant who immediately stepped forward, tapping the tablet with practiced precision before handing it gently to Emily, not forcing it into her hands, just placing it within reach, giving her the space to take it on her own terms. Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second, her fingers hovering before finally closing around it, the cool surface grounding her in a way she did not expect, the screen lighting up to reveal her name already typed at the top. A preliminary contract, structured but flexible. Nothing locked in, nothing binding beyond the choice she had already made. She scanned it quickly, not understanding every detail, but recognizing enough to know this was real, not a promise, not a gesture, but something tangible, something that would exist beyond this moment. "You can review everything with our team tomorrow," Alexander said calmly, his voice softer now, no longer addressing the room, only her. "Ask questions, challenge it. Make sure it fits you." The words settled differently than everything else he had said, because they gave her something she had not expected: control. Emily nodded slightly, her grip on the tablet steadying. "Okay," she repeated, this time with more certainty, and for the first time that night, a small shift in her expression appeared, not a full smile, but something close, something that hinted at possibility. Around them, the tension that had filled the diner began to loosen. Conversation slowly returning in low murmurs, though no one fully looked away, as if they knew they were witnessing something they would talk about long after this night ended. Her manager cleared his throat again, stepping forward with a different kind of energy now, cautious but eager. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone noticeably more respectful than it had ever been before, "if you need time off to handle this opportunity, we can arrange that." Emily glanced at him briefly, the shift not lost on her, but she did not respond right away, because for the first time, his approval was not something she needed to secure. Alexander turned back toward the entrance then, his team already moving in quiet coordination, the moment naturally drawing to a close without needing to be announced. But before he took a step, he paused, looking back at her one last time, and in that brief silence, everything from earlier returned: the rain, the uncertainty, the simple act that had started it all. He lifted his hand slightly, the $10 bill still there, no longer just a piece of paper, but something that had carried them both into this moment. "I will keep this," he said quietly, not asking, not assuming, just stating it with a kind of respect that made it feel like it belonged to both of them now. Emily nodded, her voice soft but sure. "You should," she replied, and something unspoken passed between them, something that did not need explanation. Because they both understood what it meant, he gave a small nod in return, then turned and walked toward the door, his team following without hesitation, the bell chiming once more as they stepped out into the night, the SUV still waiting, engines low and steady, and just like that, the presence that had filled the diner began to fade, leaving behind a space that felt both the same and completely different. Emily stood there for a moment longer, the tablet still in her hands, her reflection faintly visible on its darkened screen. And for the first time in a long time, she did not see someone trying to get through the next day. She saw someone standing at the edge of something new, something uncertain, but real. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing as the noise of the diner returned around her, plates clinking, voices rising again, life continuing as it always did. But inside her, something had shifted in a way that would not go back, and as she finally stepped toward the back to gather her things, the empty space in her pocket no longer felt like loss. It felt like the beginning of something she had not even known she was waiting for. The night did not end the way Emily expected it to, not with exhaustion or quiet resignation, but with a strange, steady clarity that stayed with her long after the diner lights dimmed and the last customer left. She moved through the final minutes of her shift almost on instinct, folding napkins, wiping counters, saying goodnight to co-workers whose voices now sounded distant, like echoes from a version of her life that was already beginning to shift. The tablet remained in her hands the entire time, not because she was afraid to set it down, but because it grounded her, a physical reminder that everything that had just happened was real. When she finally stepped outside, the rain had stopped completely, the air cool and clean, the streetlights reflecting softly off the pavement, and for a moment she simply stood there, looking down the road where the black SUVs had disappeared. The silence left behind was different now, not empty, but full of something she could not quite name yet. Something that felt like possibility. She took a slow breath, her fingers brushing lightly against her apron pocket out of habit before stopping. The absence of the $10 bill no longer startled her, it no longer felt like loss, instead it felt like a turning point, a small, quiet decision that had carried more weight than she ever could have imagined. The next morning came faster than she expected. Sunlight filtering through the thin curtains of her small room, the familiar sound of traffic outside reminding her that the world had not changed, even if something inside her had. For a brief second she lay still, staring at the ceiling, letting the memory of the night before settle again, half expecting it to feel like a dream, but the tablet resting on the chair beside her said otherwise. She sat up slowly, reaching for it, her name still at the top of the screen, the offer still there, unchanged, waiting. She read through it again, this time more carefully, pausing on words she did not fully understand, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt curious, determined, like each line was something she could learn rather than something meant to exclude her. Hours later, she found herself standing in a building that looked nothing like the diner, tall glass walls, polished floors, a quiet hum of professionalism that felt worlds away from where she had been just 12 hours before, and yet, she did not feel out of place, not completely, because she carried something with her that no one else in that building had earned the same way. When the doors opened and she stepped inside, a woman greeted her with a warm smile, introducing herself as part of the team, guiding her through the next steps, explaining things clearly, patiently, as if they already understood that she was not there because of experience, but because of something far more rare. As the day unfolded, Emily listened, asked questions, hesitated at times but never stepped back, and through it all, one thought stayed with her, steady and unshaken. That moment in the rain had not been about changing her life, it had been about being who she already was, and somehow, that had been enough. Weeks later, the program began to take shape, not as a distant corporate initiative, but as something real, something built with voices like hers at the center, people who understood what it meant to be overlooked, to be one step away from losing everything, and Emily found herself not just learning, but leading in ways she never thought possible, her confidence growing quietly, steadily, not from status, but from purpose. One evening, as the sun set over the city, she stood near the window of the office, watching the light fade just like it had the night everything changed, and for a brief moment, she thought about that $10 bill, about how small it had seemed, how insignificant, and yet how it had become the most valuable thing she had ever given, not because of what it was worth, but because of what it represented, a choice, simple, instinctive, and real. Somewhere in the city, Alexander Hayes still carried it, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a reminder that the rarest thing in the world was not success, not power, but the willingness to give when there was nothing left to give. And as Emily turned away from the window, stepping back into a life she had chosen for herself, she realized something that stayed with her long after that night. That sometimes the smallest act, done without expectation, becomes the moment that changes everything.